Shalom and welcome. Today I'm going to be focusing on as much as I can cover with regard to the series, which is my first Hebrew primer book. So if you have this book, well, then this is going to be great, because now I can take you step by step by step, and you can go through this whole book and you can practice all of the different grammatical things you're going to be needing in order to grow with your biblical Hebrew. So without further ado, let's begin. Alright. So, in the first thing we're going to find in this book, we're going to be dealing with vocabulary words. And we're going to deal with two different vocabulary words, verbs and noun. Okay? So here in the subject, we have verbs and nouns. Okay? I'm not going to utilize exactly the verbs and nouns all the time that are used in this book, but I am going to give you verbs and nouns which are going to function in the same fashion that the book will, just so you can follow me. Okay? So with regard to nouns, we're going to start with, for example, the word ish. Okay? Ish is the Hebrew word for man. So man as in an adult male. Okay? That's what we're referring to when we're talking about ish. Ish is an adult male. So man, adult male. Okay? So you have to understand what ish is, just so you get that concept here. The next thing, we're going to have a verb, and we're going to use the verb zachar, just like the actual book uses here. So we have a noun, ish, and a verb, zachar. Okay? And so what are we going to be doing? Well, first off, we're going to be learning something about zachar. Okay? In Hebrew, we have what's called roots. Okay? And roots are going to be based upon a concept of x, x, x. Okay? So roots, what happens with roots is, for past tense, we're going to change things that are going to be here at the end of the word. And we're only going to focus on past tense right now so that you understand what we're going to look at. Okay? So in the past tense form, we have to be basing the past tense based upon the function and structure of what is the subject, which is what the noun is going to be. So here, we're going to put on top of the noun, we're going to put the word subject, so that we understand that the noun is going to be the subject of the verb. So the noun ish is going to be the subject of my verb. So I have to ask the question is, what is the subject and the verb relationship have to be? In Hebrew, we have to first break apart the grammatics of the noun. So we have to ask the question of, what is the noun? The noun here is what's called the third person, masculine, and singular form. Okay? Why do I need to know this? Well, that's because it has to match the verb form. Here, Zayin, Chaf, Resh is the third person masculine singular form. We say Zachar. Okay? So I want you to understand the fact that as we go forward, and we're going to see this, as we go forward into the different forms by which we're going to have to utilize, the form is going to change here at the end of our verb. Okay? And so we have to think about it as first, second, and third. So the first person is going to require a first person ending. The second person is going to require a second person ending. The third person is going to depend upon the third person ending. Well, for the masculine form, there is no ending. It's just the three-root letter. Zayin, Kof, Resh. Okay? Zayin, Kof, Resh is going to be the third person masculine singular form. With the feminine form, we actually have to add the letter He to the end. And we're going to see that when we go talk about female verbs, when we deal with the female subject nouns. Okay? So here, we're just going to work on the male subject nouns, because that's what this chapter 4 wants to begin it with. So we're going to focus on, in this chapter part, just working and utilizing the issue of the masculine form, okay? And I wanted to give you this understanding so that you kind of have a heads up of knowing how Hebrew is going to start working, because Hebrew is always based upon masculine, feminine subjects, so that what's easy is you can easily identify who's talking or who's doing what. Because when you look at the verb form, you're like, hey, that's a masculine verb form, so I know the subject is also going to be masculine. If I had a female verb form, for example, in the feminine form, we just add the hey at the end and we change the vowels a little bit. It's zachra. And zachra means I have a feminine verb form, so then my subject is going to be, that's right, feminine, okay? So we just want to understand that little bitty detail, because this kind of gives us a basic understanding of seeing the function of how Hebrew is going to work, okay? This is really going to help basically grow how Hebrew is going to function and work and how it's going to be utilized, okay? So with Hebrew, we're going to be asking the question, okay? And that question is going to be, how do we create a sentence in Hebrew? What's the basic form of a sentence in Hebrew? Well, the basic sentence form we're going to be utilizing in Hebrew is we're just going to take the noun ish, okay, and we're going to attach to it a space just like you would in English, okay? So you write your noun ish, you put a space, all right? I put the line there just to show you the space, and then we're going to add the next noun, or the verb, excuse me, zachar. So now we have our first sentence in Hebrew. Ish zachar. Ish is going to be literally a man. And zachar is the word remembered. Okay? So we're going to have to write the sentence, obviously, in English differently than the way we read it, because we're reading from right to left, and we're having to put the information from left to right when you write in English. One thing we have to understand about nouns, nouns in its basic form and sense are all what's called indefinite, which means that the noun itself does not have an indefinite article. It's not like English where we have to put the word a or an. And of course we use a in front of a noun like a banana, and an would be before any noun that has a vowel sound in front of it, an apple, okay? So in the Hebrew, we're not going to say ish means man fully per se, because we're saying that this noun is indefinite, and this is so therefore it's assumed in the language that when I'm saying ish, that I'm referring to not a particular person, but rather an ish in general. So therefore I'm going to be saying a man, and so therefore we have to know that, just to know that even though the noun ish means man or adult male, I have to remember that this is an indefinite object. So it's a man or an adult male, okay? So therefore in Hebrew, when we're looking at this, we're going to be translating this ish zachar as a man remembered, okay? And that's how we're going to translate this sentence. Zachar means to bring to memory, okay? And that's the action form that we have, which is what the verb is. Verb is expressing action. And the noun, which is connected to the verb, is the subject, which is doing the action. And so we have here, ish zachar, a man remembered. We have other nouns which we can utilize. We can use a proper noun. For example, if I wanted to change this, ish, and I wanted to write, for example, instead of ish, I wanted to put a name. And so one of the names we have here is David. So David. So what is David? David is the name David, right? Okay. So in place of ish, which we're going to put that down here. Okay, ish is a man, all right? Now why am I putting brackets over this? I'm putting brackets because I want you to remember when you're writing that the word a does not exist in Hebrew. It's assumed, which means it's understood that this is an indefinite thing, So for you to identify as an indefinite thing in English, well, of course, we have an indefinite article in English as opposed to Hebrew. So therefore, we use the excuse me, we use the a here in brackets so that we're saying basically, hey, this is not an Hebrew word that exists. This is something I have to add, and this is because it's assumed in the language. Okay, so David is what we call the proper noun. Okay, remember proper nouns are different than nouns because proper nouns make a subject definite. So we have a noun like David, and we have a noun like Ish. One's a proper noun, and one is just a indefinite noun. So how do I make, for example, an indefinite noun into a definite noun? Well, there's two ways of going about it. Number one, either A, I switch it to a proper noun. So I write here the word David, and I write the word Zachar. So now it's David Zachar, David remembered. But if I want to make a noun definite, such as the word Ish, we have an article that exists that's very similar to that of English, okay? And that article is called the definite article, okay? Also known as the hey article, okay? So this hey is the ha that we have in English. The hey is the ha that we have in Hebrew. It's the equivalent to the in English. And we have a dot that we put that goes into the next letter, okay? And this dot signifies the fact that this is an attachment to the noun, therefore we know it's not a part of the root. It's not a part of the actual original noun. We know that's being attached, so we know this is the definite article that's been attached here. So if I use the word Ish, and I want to put the dagesh, well, here's the problem. This dot can't go into an aleph or any guttural. And so what I do is I have to change the hey vowel right here. We have what's called a patach. That's the long vowel looking, that's just straight. And I change it to a T looking vowel. Now it's ha'ish. Now you're going to say, well, they just sound the same. Well, that's right. But the Masoretics, they said, you know what? We want people to identify the differentiation between when there's a dagesh and when there's not a dagesh. And every time there's not a dagesh, we're going to make sure the kamatz is used. And every time there is no dagesh, whenever there's not a dagesh, okay, let's bring this back to simplicity again, because I was getting myself a little jumpy there. All right, whenever there's not a dagesh that's able to go in, they said, let's put a kamatz, so that they'll always know that whenever there's a guttural, that the kamatz is going to be the one that's replacing the patach. But whenever we have a letter that can take the dagesh, we're always going to see the patach here. So if I see these three things in front of a word, I know immediately that I have the word the. Okay? And you have no idea just how much this simplifies so much of your reading in biblical Hebrew, because if you were to open up a Torah now, and you open up any kind of Torah book, scroll that you have of Hebrew, and you can see this in front of the words, you immediately know it's the word the. Okay? You've just learned a massive amount of vocabulary, because the uses so much, it's repeatedly used in Hebrew, that it kind of takes up a lot of the words that you'd find in actual speaking and actual reading Hebrew. Okay? So the hey article changes to a ha. Now there are times you can find that the hey article might have a segul, okay? And this will only take place at certain times, okay? It's not often that it will take place, but it's only certain times we'll see this take place. The majority of the time we're going to see is the patach, or we're going to see the kamatz, okay? And the kamatz is going to be whenever we see the aleph. So whenever we see an aleph noun, we're going to see a kamatz that's going to be placed underneath the hey. Whenever we see regular nouns, we're just going to see the patach underneath the hey, okay? And this is going to help identify the fact that when we're looking at a noun, to make it definite versus indefinite, we're talking about the fact of what are we doing here is we're saying, does it have the definite article? So if it has the definite article, then I know the noun is definite, okay? Definitely one of the attributes of finding definite. The other one is the noun a proper noun like David? That makes the noun definite. Therefore, I know these are definite attributes by which I can know that these are to be understood as definite nouns and the subject is definite. When I have just a regular noun, we know we have an indefinite noun. Therefore, ish is indefinite, and therefore I have to add the a in front of my part of my word to make it a man or a person or whatever the noun is. I know that I have to add the indefinite article in English to translate it because this is how it just has to work with regard to this. The other thing we're going to learn here is we're going to have to understand something about past tense. So, what is the thing that is really important to understand about past tense? Well, let's get rid of some of our characters here and let's focus about understanding how Hebrew works with regard to past tense. Because in Hebrew, we have to think a little different than English, okay? In Hebrew, the past tense form is literally considered completed action, okay? So that completed action means that the action obviously has been finished. It's something that's been performed, okay? However, there's a lot of things that we have to understand about how it can be translated, okay? For example, I could say in this passage, I could translate it, a man did remember. I could translate it, a man had remembered. I could also translate it here, a man should have remembered. And notice here, I'm adding the word should, okay? Which means that in a past tense sense of Hebrew, known as the completed form, we have also something we have to add to it that's a part of the complexity of past as well as future, and that's called mood. The mood of what? Well, the mood of possibility. So the mood of possibility is like the should, the could, the would. Those are the things that we have to add and understand the fact that in biblical Hebrew, this can absolutely be translated as the same thing in Hebrew, ish zachar. A man should have remembered, since it's past tense, or ish zachar, a man could have remembered. No, this is all past tense, okay? And also, there's another form which we have to put here, which is the pluperfect, okay? So what is the pluperfect? The pluperfect is the past had action. So here we would say, a man has remembered. Okay? So you can see the complexity of how Hebrew, when actually reading, can actually change the dynamics of what a context of a sentence could say because of all the possibilities that completed action can express. It can use the mood. Notice the Hebrew word should does not exist because should does not exist in Hebrew. This is assumed in the actual sense. So here, we're going to have to put here assumed. So that means the actual verb form that we're looking at when we're looking at zachar, expresses the action of have remembered, and should is like all these three words are translated in the concept of this completed action form. Just as we have had remembered. This is put in here. Notice had is used here as a past tense, or did remember. Okay? He did remember. This would once again be a past tense form, and has remembered is the pluperfect form. Okay? So we're not going to go into that deep when we're actually looking at what we're going to be doing here in this actual lesson here, but this is actually really good information for you actually learning Hebrew, because it's from this you can say, wow, I didn't realize how complex Hebrew can be. Knowing the fact that in a completed action form, you can express the mood of possibility, you can express a pluperfect action, which is a past perfect action, or you can just plainly express an action that took place. And this is very important to know, because when you're reading Torah, especially when you're reading Hebrew and you're reading the stuff in the Hebrew and stuff, you're going to find that these are all the different elements that exist in the actual forms that you find when you're reading in Hebrew. When you're reading in the Torah, you're going to find that mood, a possibility, absolutely exists. That pluperfect tense, where it's just a past tense word, but it's to be understood in a pluperfect form, that this is from the context, that this is exactly what's being said here. And this is so important, because as we understand that this exists in Hebrew, and that this form does exactly happen, and that this is how this form is to be understood, we don't struggle anymore. Understanding the fact that there's so much more to how Hebrew functions, we actually begin to respect more and more of how Hebrew works, and to realize the complexity of how Hebrew works. And why is it that really a simple translation, just doesn't suffice? I mean, if you really wanted to learn Hebrew, and this is what you're doing right now is learning this, well, don't you see how quickly you can say, wow, why would I want to read an English Bible anymore? I mean, if Hebrew is that complex, I mean, there's multiple ways by which you can look at a word or a passage or a sentence, just because of the absolute different things that you can find. I mean, the mood of possibility, I didn't know that existed. I thought you had to have a word. Well, in English you do. In English you have to have the word should, could, would. Those things have to exist in a sentence to express the mood of possibility. In Hebrew, it's not the same. That thing is actually assumed, and it's going to be utilized based upon one major word, context. And context is going to express exactly how that word is going to be utilized, and it's going to give us that understanding of, yes, this indeed is true. That word is utilized and is going to be utilized in that sense. So now, moving on, let's go over some of the things that we were talking about earlier here. Okay? So here, we have to remember some of the major points when it comes to verb and subject. Okay? So in verb and subject, we always have to remind ourselves this. Verbs, number one, have to agree with the person, with the gender, and with the number associated with the subject noun. Alright? So person, we're talking, is it first, second, or third? Gender, we're talking, is it masculine or feminine? At gender, we're talking very simple, is it singular or is it plural? Alright? And this all are the rules of how subject and verbs work. Verbs have to agree. Okay? There is only an exception to the rule by which we're going to find this in the Torah, and we're going to find this within Hebrew grammar itself too, and that the exception to the rule is going to be this. When the subject is plural, okay, so when subject is plural, but the plural subject is wanted to be expressed as being in agreement with each other. So like if you wanted to say, your mother and I said, in Hebrew, you could change the verb to become singular rather than plural. And therefore, the singular form of the verb expresses the unity of the plurality of subject. Okay? The same thing can be found when we're looking at, for example, verb and subject agreement, that when there is an understanding that the demand, and this is only going to happen with one case in this subject here, that the subject is plural in nature, which means the noun is naturally plural looking, but is to be rejected as plural because the verb is singular. Therefore, the verb is demanding that the plural subject is to be read as a singular object. And that's where we find the word Elohim is used, where God is used as the subject, and we find the verb is in the singular form. And this is just basic concepts that you have to understand with regard to how verb and subject agreement work and how this is going to play a vital role. And so we find that when we're looking at a plural group and we see a subject that doesn't agree, there is another form that we're going to find here, and this is called disassociation. Okay? So this means that in this subject here, where the subject can be plural, but it's being rejected, and it wants you to focus only on the gender that's being used in the verb, it tells you only this is the one that's acceptable, but the other one is not. Okay? And so this is the other form, the last form that I can basically think about with regard to verb-subject agreement and how wonderfully and beautifully these things are going to work and be utilized. And if you want to watch this video over and over again, that's what it's made for. This is made to help encourage grammatic strength and harmony when you're learning biblical Hebrew. Okay? So in the next thing we're going to be looking at here, we've gone through chapter 4 in the basic sense of learning how a noun can have a hey article. And we're going to kind of go back and just revisit it for a second here so we can see a little more rather than just one form of it, which I utilized, so that we can see more of how this works. Okay, so if I had the word yeled, for example, yeled is a young boy, or you could call it a boy or a child, but this is a male child, okay? Yeled, and if I wanted to make it the child, remember I have to put the hey, the dagish, and the patach underneath the hey, alright? So when I add these together, right, when I bring these together, I put a dot in the yud, I add the hey in front and the patach underneath it. Now it's hayeled. So yeled becomes hayeled. Okay? Na'ar. Na'ar is a young man or a teenager. And the word na'ar, for example, comes from the root which means to stir up. It's the stage by which the child goes through major philosophical and metabolic and different physical changes by which they're going from child to adulthood. And so therefore it's called a na'ar, okay? The word yeled comes from the word yalad, which means to be born, okay? So that's where we get the young boy, child, a boy. And here, the same thing applies. If I want to make this definite, I have hey with the patach, the dagish there. I add the dagish to the nun. add the hey in front, and now I have the word ha-na'ar, the young boy, or the young man, excuse me, or the teenager, all right? So hayeled for the young boy, or the child, and hana'ar, the young man or the teenager. Now, of course, remember, if you're looking at teenager, remember that this is only the masculine form, not the feminine form. And this is important as we're going through and utilizing this hey article on the different nouns. And we'll use that on different nouns over here too. We'll bring up the word like mishpacha. Mishpacha. Mishpacha is a feminine noun, and why it is because there's a hey at the end. It's easy to identify feminine nouns because feminine nouns have two characteristics. They're either going to have a hey at the end or a tav at the end. You find these two things at the end, you predominantly have a feminine noun. There's only some exceptions to the rule, and that's only because that the noun that's created came from a root that had a hey at the end. That's the only time you're really going to find that it's not an actual feminine noun. And the same thing would apply for when you find this with the tav is at the end. But if you find a hey or a tav, you can say basically this is a feminine noun. And so here we have ha and then mishpacha. So how we put it? We put a dagish in the mem, we put a hey in front and the patach underneath, and now we have ha mishpacha, the family. Same thing as, for example, if we put like for the word melech. Melech. Melech is a ruler, a king, someone in authority, okay? So a ruler, king, one in authority. All right? So if we add the word ha in front of melech, we put dagish in the middle, and now it becomes ha-melech, the king. And so we can start taking our sentences and we can start making our nouns from indefinite to a definite noun. Instead of a family, it's ha-mishpacha, the family. Instead of a ruler or a king or a person in authority, we say ha-melech, the king, the person in authority, the ruler. Okay? And this utilizes the factors of teaching us that the hey article in front of a noun always is going to create a definite sense. So in your lessons, which you're going to be utilizing, you're going to be basically taking, in the next few lessons that you'll be using, you're going to be taking the nouns that are indefinite, such as we'll use the word ish as an indefinite noun. You'll be taking nouns that are definite, such as the word yeled, becomes hayeled, and we're going to be taking nouns that are definite because they're a proper noun,